The floor is yours.
Cool. Thanks and welcome everybody. For the next hour, we're going to think outside the barn. So I'm going to talk today about getting started with pasture-raised livestock. And when I say pasture-raised livestock, in the way I interpret this is that the animals live outside on pasture all year round. They're born there, they get loaded for harvest there, no matter the weather, it's just, that's where they live. So a little bit, this is my bio for the conference, and then a little bit about the contents of the talk. So if you're interested in working with livestock, or if you're already working with livestock, one of the ways to set yourself apart is to pasture raise your animals. It takes a very different set of infrastructure and mindset, but it's better for the animals and it's better for your land. So assuming since you're here, you're at least vaguely interested in this. So I'm going to discuss some practical considerations for successfully pasture raising animals. And so this is basically on the right side, just like a laundry list of the different topics that I'm going to go through. But at the bottom, I have a disclaimer. I'm a first generation farmer and I have no official schooling in farming, so everything I know comes from experience. So I really only know about pigs, sheep, goats, chickens, and rabbits because that's what I've raised. So please don't ask me questions about cows. I'll just embarrass myself. So none of the pictures in my talk will have citations because they're all from my farm. Again, that's where I've learned everything. That's where I work. So the first thing, okay, I lied. There is a citation, but that's just a diagram, so fine. The first concept I want to talk about is rotational grazing because this is super important to successfully pasture raising animals. So the idea of rotational grazing is that you have all of your grazing land, kind of represented by like the circle in the diagram, and you chop it into different pieces. And you fence those pieces so that you only have animals on certain pieces and they move through the different paddocks in the different areas. So that means that everywhere the animals aren't is resting, the grass is regrowing, things are recuperating. So a big advantage to rotational grazing is that you don't concentrate poop. Because the animals are moving around your farm, they're spreading their manure. You don't have to worry about it. If they were in a barn and they always pooped in the barn, you need to worry about it. So you don't have to shovel poop if you're rotational grazing, which is great. But I also want to point out that just putting a cow out in a 4-acre paddock is not rotational grazing. I would call that overgrazing because that cow is always going to be in that same paddock, even though it's really big. 1 cow, 4 acres. It's still not rotational grazing. You need to cut that paddock up into different sub-paddocks and then move the cow around that area in order to do rotational grazing. So this is really like a bedrock idea for a pasture-based farm, is to be able to do rotational grazing. Okay, so we're going to start going down that laundry list of things, and there's so much to consider. And so I just want to, another disclaimer here at the front that each of these topics we're going to discuss could be a presentation of its own. But the point here that we want to make today is that we're just going to think about all of them a little bit to give you an idea of what to consider if you want to move forward with pasture-based livestock. So my first thing is planning. You should write a plan. You should have a plan, but you should write it. You should have a backup plan. You should learn to love plans. It sounds kind of weird. It doesn't work for everyone. But this is something I think is really important. And I learned this definitely. The first plan you write will be wrong. When I look at my first business plan that I wrote for the farm that I now run, it's embarrassing. I said not only was I going to raise the animals, but then I was going to have this separate area where I was going to grow all of their food. That is no way. But in the act of writing that plan, I thought a lot about what I want from my farm, how I want my animals to grow, how big my farm needed to be because of the number of animals I wanted to grow. Like that process of writing a plan is super important because you're going to learn as you write. So the first plan you're going to write is going to be wrong, but it's fine. Just write it. You're going to learn. As part of that planning process, like if there's any certifications that you're interested in, you need to think about those from the beginning because a lot of certifications like organic or animal welfare approved they have infrastructure requirements. And so if this is something that you're interested in doing, you should think about it from the beginning so that you can build for them. And just one example to think about is if you're ever going to be organic, you can't use any pressure treated posts for anything on your fences. So this is just as you're writing that plan, think about where you want to go and then build towards it. And in my instance, on my farm, I wanted to be animal welfare approved. And so sometimes when I was like designing the roost where my chickens would sleep, I was like, I don't really know how many square footage or linear footage a chicken needs. But I could look it up because that is mandated in the standards for this certification. So I know if I'm going to do 200 birds, I need this many feet. And so that would actually help me in building out stuff on my farm. Another thing to think about is breed selection. So not every breed is bred to live outside the barn, out on pasture. A lot of the breeding that we've done for animals is to make them grow faster, be more productive, and even in ways that can be detrimental to their health. So it's mostly or always better, if you're going to pasture raise, to stick to heritage breeds. But beyond that, you want to consider meat or fat quality. If you're selling for meat, then that should be one of your big drivers. And there's definitely breeds that are known for meat or fat quality more so than others. And you do need to consider also growth rate, and then as well as end size, but reproductive ability is another big one. In order to pasture raise animals and have them birth on pasture, they pretty much need to birth unassisted. And like a lot of different sheep and goat breeds, it's like kind of acceptable for them to need assistance during birthing. But if they're outside and you're not outside, they need to be able to do that on their own. So reproductive ability is good to keep in mind too. Climactic suitability. Up here we get hot winters, or no we don't. We get cold winters usually and hot summers. So you also need to have animals that are okay in both of those. And usually winter is more of an issue, like an animal staying warm is harder during winter than an animal being too hot during summer. I don't do much with fiber on my farm, but if that's going to be part of your business and that's something you're interested in, then definitely there's breeds that are better for fiber than others. And maybe you're interested in something else. There's lots of other things out there that you can get breeds for, so you should check your plan, see what your priorities are that you set for yourself. Fencing. So good fences, I think, make good livestock farms. I don't want my animals in the road or in the neighbor's garden or on the runway at the local airstrip. So I want to keep all the right animals in, which are mine, and all the wrong animals out, which are predators. So I have electric on both sides of my perimeter fence for that point. The electric on the inside keeps my animals in. The electric on the outside hopefully helps keep predators out. So we're going to talk about fencing for a couple slides because it's important. When you're fencing animals, electricity is your friend, but there's lots of different types of fencing. So in this picture here, this white netting fence is what I would call a temporary fence. You can just stick it in the ground and pull it back out. So I use those to subdivide some of my fields, mostly for grazing my ruminants. And then kind of in the background there, you can see what's a permanent fence. So that divides my big pasture into sub-paddocks. And then at the very top, that's part of my perimeter fence, which I hope is going to last forever. So on the right, that picture is again my perimeter fence out in a wooded area. And so you can see that it does have hard panels, so it's a physical fence. You know, if an animal runs up against it, they can't get through it. But in front of the physical fence, it has electric wires. And so that's the psychological type of fence, because if an animal touches the electric, mostly with their nose, it hurts. And so they could get through just an electric fence, but it's a psychological thing. They don't want to get hurt. And part of the fun of having fencing is also shown on that picture on the right, that trees will do mean things like fall on your fence, and then you have to fix it. So fencing. So when you're thinking about designing your fence, there's a couple different layouts that are common. One is called the central road, and that's basically what I had because there was already an old road on the property that I had. So basically, as you walk along the road, there's fences and paddocks on each side. Another idea of how to lay out is a wheel and spokes. You would have like a main area in the middle where you would have water and feed and all of that, and that's kind of like slices of a pizza or something as they go out, and so potentially you can even reuse some of the infrastructure in that main, in the center. And then you can just do blocks if you have like a big tract of land that's actually rectangular. I don't. You could just make blocks as it works. But besides just having the paddocks where the animals live, you also need to think about having a corral. And so that would be an area if you need to divide or subdivide a group. Like for instance, if it's the fall and I'm going to take my lambs in for slaughter, then I need to be able to take my whole group of sheep and divide it into breeders that I'm going to keep and rebreed, and then the lambs that I'm going to take off to slaughter. So a corral would be good for that. Also a loading area for when they go to slaughter, and also gates. We spent a lot of time thinking about gates because gates are expensive and you generally don't electrify them, so they're a weak point in your fence. But we need to have a gate just for daily access that a human's going to walk through. And so because the way my fence is set up, that's just a 4-foot gate because it's just for people. But then I have a tractor access gate, which is 8 feet, and that's where I get the tractor. But then I also need to get feed delivered, so then I have a 16-foot gate, so that bigger stuff can get in. So just thinking about using your fence in a way that's going to make it, building your fence in a way that's going to make it usable in the future. Another piece of infrastructure that you need to have is water and how to move water around because everybody needs water. So what is your water source? When I first started, the water source for all my animals was my house well. If you live in an area that has city water, yay, that might be an option. I don't. Now I have a farm well, a dedicated farm well. But also in my very first plan that I wrote, I was going to pump water from a river. It didn't work, but it's an idea. So you need to have the source, but you also have to have a way to distribute it. So depending on where your animals are, how far they are from the source, and how many you have, you could use a big tote, like in that picture, that's a 275-gallon tote that I can put water in. But if you have a smaller number of animals, you can just use a 5-gallon bucket and carry it. It would be even better if you had a hose that could make it over to whatever the animal is drinking out and you don't have to carry it. But if you have hoses or like a semi-permanent water line, which is lightweight plastic and above ground, that's good, but it's going to freeze. So if you can, it'd be great to put in a permanent water line. That's a heavier gauge, but you have to bury it. And it has to go in general at least 4 feet deep for it to not freeze. So that's a lot of effort, but it's nice to not have to carry water everywhere. There's a lot of different types of waterers. The first one is a tub, and my pig here took that literally. She's supposed to drink out of it, but she decided to get in it. And that is a 65-gallon tub, so she's a big pig. There's also different types of fonts. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but one of them is called an easy fill. And so it's generally used for smaller animals like chickens, and it has a plastic base, and then it holds 5 gallons, and has this big wide top. And so they're like, wow, it's really easy to fill. This is amazing. I found that they should actually be, I think they should actually be called easy spills. Because I don't have a lot of flat land on my farm, and so if it's like just a little bit not flat, the whole thing spills out because it's got this nice big top. So whatever. different waterers are better in different situations. Range waterers are nice big. I have 85-gallon ones that I can fill up, and then they last for a couple days. Nipple drinkers are better for small animals or especially young chickens. And then I do a lot with just rubber bowls. Like a couple 15-gallon rubber bowls will last animals for a while. Even more things to consider on waterers. I have a lot of big pigs, and they can and will flip just about anything. The biggest waterer I have is 85 gallons, so it weighs probably when it's full, like, what is 8 pounds a gallon or something? Is that 600 pounds, something like that? They'll flip it. It's bonkers. So just think about that if you're going to have pigs. And then, yeah, do you have flat enough ground for whatever type of water you're going to get? During winter, it gets even more fun because water will freeze. So hoses and water lines will freeze during winter. Anything not buried 4 feet in the ground will freeze. So you need water heaters. And so this is a picture of one of my range waterers. So it has a water heater that's in the tank, the white part, and then also another one that's in the red part, the bowl that they actually drink from. And those are, there has to be 2 of them for it to work well during very cold weather. And then I have some other type of water heaters. But to run a water heater, you need electricity. And because it's a high amperage device, you need a fairly big extension cord, or you need to have permanent power in your fields. So I would love to do solar, but solar for a high amperage device like that is not really an option unless you have lots of batteries. So if you're in a pinch, a rubber bowl is best when you can't power a water heater, because you can, even if it ices up, you can usually just kick the side of it and break the ice. But just an idea, if you can think about having a fence line situation, then you can get 2 for the price of 1. So that's what I'm showing here. On this side, there's pigs, and they're using one side of the waterer, and on the other side, there's chickens, and they're using the other side of the waterer. So for me running electric cords, I get to water 2 different groups of animals. Okay, we haven't talked about feed. So also everybody eats. And the picture here is actually my pigs are cleaning up in the spring one year after my ruminants had spent the winter in this area. So there's lots of hay on the ground, so the pigs like to root it up. The other thing this shows is this is actually an example of what's called a creep feeder. So this is like a shelter that I use for all my animals, or a multi-species shelter. But because we put this piece of wood across it, it allows the little pigs to go in there, and the big pig is too big. So sometimes when you have a mom who, with her piglets, she'll dominate the food, and the piglets won't be able to get enough. And so setting up a creep feeder that just physically allows small pigs in and not hurt, make sure that you could put a couple bowls outside for the mom and then a couple bowls inside to make sure that the piglets are getting enough food. Anyway, so just think, if you are grass feeding your ruminants, you don't need to buy in grain rations for them. But then you worry a lot about your pasture. So what is growing in your pasture? In general, there's warm season grasses, cool season grasses. You may have like a lot of legumes, or you may have a field of pure alfalfa. And the way that you interact with that field and that your animals would interact with that field would all be really different. Like, for example, if you for some reason have a field of pure alfalfa, it'd probably make your ruminants sick if they ate it, because it's just so high protein, it'd be so rich. It would basically give them diarrhea. So you would have to really modulate their eating of that and intersperse it with other things. So just, you need to always be thinking about what is growing. The second question to think about with pasture is, how tall are you grazing it? In the picture here, the grass is actually well above, this is a goat, it's well above her head. So I believe in grazing tall. I haven't had an issue with grazing tall, but if there's anybody from USDA, NRCS, and they have that little stick and it shows that you should graze it 3 inches. Yeah, anyway, we should talk about that. I think grazing tall is great. It actually keeps their heads up more, it's less of a parasite issue. So I would say if you've got tall grass, don't be afraid to graze tall. Another thing to think about, especially when you're getting started with your fields, is do you need to do any amendments to your fields? So my land, when I first got it, was very acidic. It was basically, it had been more forested, and forests tend to have higher acidity. And so I wanted to open up more to pasture and to silvopasture. So I needed to add lime the first couple of years to up my pH and decrease that acidity. And then if you're pasture raising, the fertilizer should, it's the manure from your animals. So well-managed pasture rotations will increase the yield of your fields, which is super awesome. Another thing to think about feed-wise is hay. So you need to find a hay supplier for your grass-fed animals. So this is a picture of me getting hay. One year I work with a local hay grower. I basically buy everything that they can produce, and it works really nicely. And so I am buying off the field versus in a barn. So it's a different level of effort. Basically, the farmer goes through with the baler, bales it up, and then just leaves it. And I go through and pick up all of them and put them on my trailer. So it's a lower price to me because I'm doing the effort of picking it up versus them and putting it in their barn and then me getting it out of their barn. So that's nice. But as far as planning, that means when they call me and say, hey, we're baling the hay today, you need to be here. Okay, I need to be there. The hay quality changes throughout the season. The first cut is the most abundant but the least nutritious. The second cut is better nutrition. Third cut is best, but it's only available in small quantities or not at all some years, depending on the weather. But the first cut may be as early as May. So you're buying hay for winter, but you're starting to buy it in May. And so it can feel really like it's just a year-round thing, getting hay. And so you need to figure out where to store your hay. And okay, so maybe a barn is good for storing hay. So we're thinking outside the barn, but actually I have a barn and I store my hay in it. Okay, and then let's talk about grain rations. So when you're writing your plan, one of the things you want to think about is if you want to do any, like if you have any feed choices that you want to make or requirements for your feed. So you could work with conventional feed, you could do non-GMO, this is not as common anymore as it was a couple years ago. I've been seeing that feed mills will be doing conventional or organic. They're not offering a different non-GMO line as much now as they used to. Or you could think about doing soy-free, whatever you're interested in. But you need to find a feed mill who either makes that feed already or is willing to custom make that feed for you. And hopefully you're within their delivery range. That would be amazing. And then every once in a while, feed availability itself becomes an issue. I saw this in 2022. There was a field pea shortage, and I do soy-free rations, and so most of the protein in my feeds comes from field peas. And so it was actually a pretty scary time. We were having calls with the feed mill. They're like, how many tons do you think you need before the end of, before the next harvest of peas comes in? I was like, how many tons do you think you can get? So yeah, excitement abounds. If you're gonna do a custom feed because you want something specific like soy-free, then you need to think about the minimums. Most mills, well, I don't know, some mills have a minimum of 1 ton at a time. So just something to think about. Minerals, they can be part of the complete ration that you get, or you could get them separately and do a free choice mineral. There's advantages to both, just again, something to think about. Okay, so if you decided the feed you want, now you have to worry about delivery and storage. You need to acquire the feed. So for me, that's unloading from a common carrier. So basically I get a pallet of feed at a time, just over a ton. And it comes on a 53-foot truck, and I use my tractor to unload it from the back of the truck. I would love to be within delivery range of somebody and they could show up where it's just a dedicated feed truck and they have an auger and they could just drive up like to my barn and fill something with feed. Amazing. If you happen to live close to a mill, you could pick up. If you're doing really small amounts, you could just work in single bags. You could do pallets of bags. Some feed mills moved from 50-pound bags, that used to be the standard, to 40-pound bags for shipping reasons. So just another thing to think about. Okay, so once you've acquired your feed, you need to store it. So that could be in silos if you have a large enough volume and can keep rats out of it. It could be in buckets or barrels or in the sling totes that they come from. So yeah, rats. Yuck. It's a big issue. I didn't have too much of an issue for the first couple of years, but once the rats found me, it's something that I've been battling since. So my latest attempt to battle the rats is shown in that picture. So I got these pretty heavy gauge blue plastic barrels, and I've been putting feed into those, and so far that's been helping, but I need to be super consistent about it every year or they're just, yeah, it's an issue. So the last thing here is even once you've acquired and stored your feed, you still need to get it to your animals, probably twice a day. So you need to consider also how to get your feed from your on-farm storage to your animals' paddocks. And I would just say that buckets are the farmer's best friend. At the size I'm at right now, I can still pretty much hand carry 5-gallon buckets of feed to all the outlying paddocks that I need to. Or if I have animals in really far outlying paddocks, I'll just use my tractor to move a pallet of those barrels out there. And then I can scoop out, yeah.
And so in this picture, are you puncturing a hole in the bag to put into the glue, or you are?
No, that's a good question. So there actually is a hole in the bottom. You just have to untie it.
Oh.
Yeah, there's like a little chute thing.
So you need the tractor, though. This is key.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
There's usually hoops on the top of those bags too, so you can lift them out of pallet.
Yeah, for sure. I would need something that could lift it higher, though.
Yeah.
My tractor can't get that high. Yeah. Okay, so still thinking about how do we actually get the feed to the animals' mouths. So the timing of your feeding, you could open feed, depending on what animal you're raising. I found with pigs, it doesn't work. They eat too much and they get really fat. So I tried open feeding for a while, but now I'm on scheduled or metered feeding where I take them food twice a day. So you can put stuff in bowls. I really like rubber bowls. They're fairly indestructible. I've had some pigs that tear them apart, but for the most part, it works pretty good. You could do feed troughs, or you could have bulk feeders. But a big thing to think about here is getting into and out of the paddock safely at feeding times. Especially if I've got a big group of pigs in a paddock, and they know it's feeding time, and they're pigs. They're very food motivated. Basically, you'll be standing outside of the fence with 2 buckets of feed, and they'll just be like a mass of squealing pigs. And so finding ways to deal with your animals and to get them used to that situation, get yourself used to that situation, especially when they get towards harvest weight, they're going to be 250 pounds. They can knock you around pretty good. So it's important to socialize them and to have like rituals that they understand, like, you don't need to bite me, I'm going to put the food down. It will be really, really helpful for doing that. The last point on here is eliminating competition by having an adequate number of feeders. So I talked about the standards that I have the animal welfare approved certification. And so this is one of their standards, that you need to eliminate competition at feeding time by having an adequate number of feeders. And I put eliminate in quotes because I don't think it's possible. Like if I have 2 animals and I put out 2 bowls, they're still going to compete with each other. Like it's a thing. So I think of it as reducing competition by having an adequate number of feeders. And certainly, yeah, if you have 15 pigs, you can't just put 1 bowl in there. But you could put 8 bowls and they'll still push each other around. Part of the fun. Okay, so moving on. From feed, you need to think about having shelter for your animals because they're living outside in all sorts of weather. They need to have shelter. So my husband Nick has come up with this design for these shelters. So we make them on farm. We have a little sawmill, so we can make most of the wood for ourselves. We just get a plywood top that's a little more rain resistant, and we build them. So what we're seeing here is like a view of one of our pastures, and out there you can see some of the goats. And so we basically give them strips of this field, and we pre-set up the shelters so that each strip will come with its own shelter. And so we move the shelters once, and then we can just move their temporary fencing every day, and they'll have that shelter there. So there is this is considered a portable shelter that I use, but there's also natural shelters. So natural shelters, or it's sometimes called a living barn, is the idea that you can use trees and other natural features that you have on your land as shelter. A living barn most typically refers to cows in the woods during the winter. And so this level of shelter may or may not be enough for other species, really depending on your weather. So my shelters are portable, but what I mean by that is they're portable with the forks on a tractor. They're not human portable. I can't move those things. They're a couple hundred pounds. But that was a choice that we made to build them in this way. So the con is that you need a tractor to move them. So no matter where they are, and no matter how muddy it is, you need to get the tractor in there and move them. But the pro is hopefully that they're relatively bomb-proof and they're going to stand up to weather for years, even though they're wood. And then I just note that sometimes my pigs get natural shelter, but other than that, like my sheep and goats always have these portable shelters. So in the summer, the idea of the shelter is to provide shade and to protect from rain. Goats hate getting wet, and so every time it rains, the goats will be in the shelter. But then in the winter, you can add more boards to the side of the shelter and making it more enclosed to help keep the warmth in and block out the snow and the wind. So I use these same shelters all year long. For bedding, I don't really use any bedding for anybody during the summer, but there's lots of different materials you can use depending on the species. I typically use waste hay for the ruminants, so I just feed them on the ground, feed them hay on the ground, and the hay that they don't eat becomes their bedding. I'll just give hay to the pigs, and then I really like hemp bedding for chickens inside their roost, and would definitely recommend that. I think it is much more effective than like wood shavings or anything. But for ruminants, you need to prevent hoof rot by making sure they have a dry area, so bedding will help with that. And chickens, it's more about odor control inside their closed-in area, the coop, and keeping that dry means the ammonia can't build up. And honestly, pigs just like hay. You give them a bale of hay and they just smile and like carry it around and play with it. So it's pretty fun to just give them hay. Okay, so let's talk about a tractor. Now I can't imagine farming without one, but I sure didn't want one when I was first planning my farm. So this is a picture. I have a Kubota tractor. It's an L48. So you should think about if you need one, and you should really think about what size. I don't think I really appreciated that. Like with how I acquire feed, unloading 2,000-pound pallets off the back of the truck, and move around my portable shelters, I need a tractor. You can design a farm for no tractor, but you can't do stuff like that. I wish there were electric tractors. I hope they're in our future, but they're not here yet.
Oh, they are. They're
Nice.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, they're available, I thought mostly in Europe, and they cost.
Yeah, there's still a lot. Yeah, it's definitely not viable for the average business.
Yeah, I'm totally here for it when I can afford it.
Till it gets too cold and once in a while. And you won't be into it.
Probably not. Another thing I thought about is a tractor share among a group of farmers. Because maybe for some people on their farm, they only need a tractor like once a month to do some heavy work. So like, man, wouldn't that be cool if they could like share a tractor if they all lived close enough? But that would be a pretty clear biosecurity risk, and I should probably talk a lot more about biosecurity, but I don't know, there's so many things to talk about. So I think the most important thing here is what size. So in the picture, I'm using the tractor to lift one of the 275-gallon totes to refill another 275-gallon tote, which is watering the chickens out in the woods. And so again, it's not a huge amount of weight in 275 gallons of water, but it sloshes. And so you need to be working well below your tractor's like limit, just because there's that instability of the load. So yeah, I think because I want to routinely lift things that are a ton or more, like I just need a certain size tractor. So you should think about what you're going to use your tractor for, and that'll help you size it. Okay, medical. You should definitely plan for the worst and hope for the best, but it gets real weird real fast. And I think when I was beginning as a livestock farmer, this wasn't something I appreciated enough, that the amount of weird medical stuff I was going to have to do to my animals was just way more than I expected that it would be. So this is something to think about. So in this left picture, this is a goat, and she got mites, even though she lives with all the other goats and none of the other goats got mites. And so they were just tearing up the skin on her legs. And so this is, we had treated her with Desitin and with something else. And so I'm holding the goat and he's smearing the goat legs with this stuff. And it's weird. And then on the right, this is my trusty farm dog. She was having issues with her shoulder. So Nick is giving her cold laser therapy, but they're both wearing the protective glasses, so that's very safe. So for medical stuff, you should find a vet that you like. And you will need emergency services at some point, so make sure they deal with emergencies. But then I really like that my vet offers phone and text and email support, because sometimes I just need to have a question answered and I don't really need them to come out and look at an animal. And so that's really great if you're able to have that type of relationship. It's pretty cool. One of the things, like every time you have a medical event on your farm, you have to decide, do I need to deal with this myself? Do I need to get the vet involved? Or like, at what point do you call the vet? And that's sometimes difficult to determine. So some of the injuries that you'll see are just lacerations. The previous owners of my property thought it would be super fun to throw a bunch of trash in certain areas on the property. And so there's, sometimes the animals will like uncover broken glass. And then they could potentially, cut themselves with it. There's also just sprains and potential broken bones, especially when it's icy. Just like it's hard for us to walk on ice, it's hard for other animals too. And then I've had very occasionally a birthing issue that we need to contact the vet for. But there's also just some routine medical care that you need to do, depending on your growing practices, but it could be vaccinations or deworming or castration of your animals. So there's the bad, like, oh my gosh, somebody got hurt, but then there's also just the yearly stuff that you have to do. And this picture is actually, we had a pig die while it was under veterinary care. She had, I think this was an anal prolapse, which means that part of her anus fell out her butt, and we weren't sure why. And she was supposed to be a breeder pig. We were raising her up to be a breeder, and so this was not a good sign for a breeder. So we had the vet out a couple times, and they did some different things. And then the pig did end up dying, unfortunately, and so they, the vets were interested in doing a necropsy to try and figure out like what exactly had happened and how they could perhaps have a better outcome in the future. I'm just gonna plug in my PC right now. So let me hit close and remember what I was supposed to talk about next. This is gonna be some pretty sweet multitasking.
Just a quick question while you.
Yeah.
Your vet did that? You did it for charge, or because I know they can get down to Yukon and bring it to the Yukon and they'll do that.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good question. So I paid for the care that they had provided for the animal, but they were interested from a professional standpoint. Oh, I haven't used that. To do the necropsy, so they didn't charge me for the necropsy. But yeah, I also have taken a pig to the Yukon vet lab, and they're very nice and helpful. Okie doke. All right. So kind of keeping with our medical theme, I want to talk about parasites. Because parasites are probably the biggest downside to pasture raising livestock. So I thought we should spend some slides on that. So we're going to talk about 3 aspects of parasite. You're going to monitor, control, and breed for resilience. So for monitoring, you can do what's called FOMACHA for small ruminants, which is basically you look at the color of the inside of their eyelid, and from that you can judge anemia, and from that you can judge how many or how bad their barber pole or homunculus contortus parasites are in their gut, because they'll be leaching their blood. So that's a way that you can kind of quantify like which animal is doing better or which animal might need help. Also, just watch for slowness. If you're doing daily pasture moves, they get excited about moving to fresh grass, and so everybody will run. And so if somebody's a little slower than normal, that can be a sign that they're having parasite issues. There could be other subtle changes in behavior, sluggishness. Their body condition can go down if they're having a parasite issue. They'll get skinnier. Another thing you can do is learn to do fecal egg counts. So if you look through their poop, there'll be eggs from the parasites in there. And so if you have a microscope and you kind of mash up their poop, and there's like a whole SOP you can follow, you can count the little eggs and you'll have an idea. So that picture is actually, I have a microscope, and we're looking at some poop, and I wasn't sure what that thing was. So I sent that picture to my vet, and they said, oh, that's pollen. I was like, okay, that's probably fine. You can also check your the livers, hearts, and lungs of slaughtered animals for parasite damage, or talk to your butcher if they're throwing out your livers. That might be part of the issue. And then you can do a mineral panel testing on livers of slaughtered animals to check levels of things like selenium and other stuff just to make sure it's in the right range, or you could adjust your supplementation if it's not. So you can, the idea on that side is you can monitor your herd to get some idea of your parasite load. But how do you control it? So for small ruminants, good pasture rotation does wonders, especially tall grass grazing, because if they poop and then the parasites are on the ground and then they're like really nosing to the ground because the grass is very short, then they're going to re-ingest more of those. You can also, if you have appropriate species, do multi-species grazing, and use animals that don't have parasitic overlap, such as sheep and cows, in your grazing rotation. And I think just having chickens on your farm helps. They break up manure and they eat things. Other control, herbal remedies, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. I use a non-pharmaceutical drench in my small ruminants. It includes garlic extract and apple cider vinegar. There's actually not a lot of data on whether the garlic is helping, but it makes them smell very nice, and it makes me feel better. If there is some clear data on the efficacy of oregano as a natural anti-enthalmic, but it's much more expensive, so I haven't used it. But when things get bad for one individual animal, I will use a pharmaceutical dewormer, and I have saved lives doing this. So I spot treat specific animals. I don't blanket treat the whole herd. So parasite control in pigs, good pasture rotation helps, but really for pigs, the life cycle of a parasite is too long. It's measured in years instead of days, so it's just harder to control. In my pigs, I have not been able to get away with not blanket deworming. So I use a commercial dewormer, usually in my sows, about 2 weeks before they farrow, and then in my sows and piglets when they're 6 to 10 weeks old. And then if any of them are struggling or coughing, I'll do it at another time too. I don't think this is a great solution. I didn't have parasite issues in pigs for the first couple of years, but now I do. So I do worry that I'm creating resistance in my herd by blanket using dewormers, but my vets don't have a better answer. But okay, technically a better answer is to raise a pot of pigs in one area and then don't have pigs in that area again for 21 years. But this doesn't really work for me, so. Okay, so the last thing that we can do for parasites, and I think it's probably the most important thing we can do, is breed for resistance. So to start with, certain breeds are known for being naturally more resistant or resilient. So resistant in this sense means that they're less likely to get worms, but resilient means that they can have some amount of worms and just tolerate it. So they're both good things. I've heard that within your herd, there's the 70-30 rule, so that 70% of your parasites are going to be in 30% of your animals. And so if you can really commit to breeding breeding the animals that have good parasite resistance, you can make quite a big difference because of the 70-30 rule. But it can be hard to breed for parasite resistance if it conflicts with a secondary goal, such as like you have a sheep that's a really good mother or has really good milk production or has a really good fiber color or whatever that you're looking for, but she's bad with parasites. But I would argue that you should just stick with breeding for parasites, and it should pay off in the long run for your animals on your land. Okay, so handling. You can't make an animal on pasture do anything she doesn't want to do. So this is a picture of one of my sows. She's probably about 650 pounds. In this picture, she's out in the woods, and I have erected part of my handling system around her because I needed to castrate her piglets, and I was really worried about how she was going to do it. So I have found better ways to do this, but this was my attempt 1 year to just handle her in a way that would be safe for me and safe for the piglets. So on the right is my new, well, it's not new anymore, but my fancy handling system, like a professional type. So you can see there's a goat. She's the matriarch in the headlock here in the front, and then one of her daughters is on the scale behind her in those bars, and then one of her daughters is waiting next. So that's a nice system. It has a solid panel, so they can't see out. They just see before them and behind them, and there's animals there, so they feel thoroughly comfortable with that. But I started my farm with just this hard panel and pallet structure. And this was, so I'd load the animals in from here, and they'd be in this area. And then this was kind of like some weird squeeze pen type of thing. So they filter around here, run through here, and then we let one animal in here, which is a little pallet palace, and do whatever we needed to do in there. So this is, you know, the homemade on the left versus the professional system on the right, and I would definitely suggest the professional system as soon as you can afford it. But part of that handling is socializing. And so I use the term socializing to basically mean using treats as bribes, or just developing relationships with your animals so that you can catch an animal when you need to. Although my vet assures me that if the animal is sick enough, you can catch it. But so we do socialization in many ways. This is my faithful farm dog cleaning a pig snout. And my farm dog is a pet, but she's always out and around with us, and so I don't want the animals to have a fear reaction of her just because she's a dog. So with the birds, especially starting when they're relatively young, they get to meet her and get comfortable with her so that, you know, they don't get scared every time they see a dog their whole lives. And then on the right is we had a group of piglets, and so if you just go in there and hold still, eventually their curiosity will overcome their fear, and they'll come up and sniff you and try and eat your shoelaces, and do stuff like that. Like, just get used to approaching humans, so that you can work with them for the rest of their lives. So when I'm socializing animals, I use a lot of yogurt cups, because they're a convenient size and quantity for just bringing a little something out and feeding it to the animals. But I don't actually have any particular affinity with any yogurt brands. I just use the cups because they're convenient. So yeah, just holding out a cup and getting animals that tend to be shy, like sheep and goats, to come up and eat out of your cup can be an important part of socializing them. So I want to talk also about poisonous plants. So this is a picture of my matriarch goat who was very sick because she ate the CT state flower, which is mountain laurel, which is wildly poisonous. But I checked, since I'm giving this talk in Massachusetts, and your state flower is the Mayflower, which I think, not an expert, I think it can be a group of several flowers, but at least some of them are poisonous, so probably don't eat the state flower in your state either. So there's lots of poisonous plants. Some of the ones I have are fern, laurel, rhododendron, cherry tree. The leaves are poisonous, but only while they're wilting. But the list is infinite, and especially like the poisonous, whether or not a plant is poisonous depends on the species too. But I think an important point is the severity varies widely. So like this picture, my ruminants are in with a bunch of ferns, and they're going to eat some of them, but there's lots of other stuff in that paddock too. So like a little fern is all right, even though it is a poisonous plant. But a little bit of laurel is fatal. So severity varies widely. But check the land before you buy. Don't be like me and buy 20 acres of laurel. That would be bad. Okay, so breed stock. So line breeding is okay for a while, just breeding the same animals you have on the farm over and over and taking their offspring for meat. But eventually you'll need some new genetics. So this is me getting 2 new goat breeders in from a breeder in New Jersey. So yeah, for breed stock, you can buy in new when you need to. For genetics, you can make your own. But you should just always be thinking about transport, and you should be wary of state lines. often you need a health certificate to move animals across state lines. You could need blood tests depending on it, and you'll need an import permit for the state that you're bringing into. You need to register with your state. So if you're getting breeding stock, it's easiest to get it within your own state, or do a bunch of that. Okay, so that brings us to actual breeding. So you should be making babies on your farm or buying in. In this picture, I don't recommend this. This is my brother standing there with the shepherd's crook doing nothing. One of my fences got knocked down, and at the time this was my male goat breeder, and he is attempting to breed a pig. So, not great, but okay. But seriously, I artificially inseminate my pigs. I don't want to deal with a boar. I really like not dealing with a boar. And because I go to a semen bank, I can get semen from different boars. And so I can have sows that are a variety of breeds and still service them all. I do keep a ram to breed my sheep and a buck to breed my goats. I buy day-old chicks and brood them up. And I think just having animals birth on pasture is amazing. And this top picture, that is a pig who's about to give birth, and she has made this, like, I don't know, 15-foot nest. Like, the amount of landscaping a pig can do in the forest before she gives birth is, I don't know, I put in here, it's awe-inspiring. And I think, to me, seeing pigs out on pasture, like, doing this, like, sure, she made the nest so big that actually she couldn't fit in it, so she's just stuck her head in it. But I think this underscores the cruelty of farrowing crates, because that restricts the movement of the pig around the time of farrowing. Like, she's just got so many instincts that she needs to do. So yeah, I would, if you're considering pastured pigs, you could consider AI. Like, it's relatively simple compared to other species, and it's safe for them, they tolerate it, so something to think about. Okay, so predators, you don't want them to eat your animals. So this picture is me holding an owl. It was late at night, so it's totally dark, one winter. I went out to the chicken coop to do something, opened up the chicken coop, all the chickens were in there on the roost because it was nighttime. I was like, that's not a chicken. But because it was nighttime, I was wearing a headlamp, and so I think I light blinded the owl because I was able to just reach out and grab it. It wasn't a great idea. And so I took it outside of the chicken coop, and I showed Nick. I was like, oh my gosh, Dad, what's going on? I have an owl in my hands. I'm like, it's really hurting my hands too. It's like very strong claws. He's like, oh, wow, can you just hold it for a minute? I gotta get my camera out. I was like, Nick. He's like, oh, look away. Your light, your headlamp is interfering with the picture. So you never know.
Great shot, though.
You never know who's gonna try to get your animals. The predators I worry about most on my farm are fox, coyote, neighborhood dogs, and then bipedal apes, mostly my neighbors. But this is a picture of my faithful farm dog who has caught a fox. That fox had been on our farm for a long time, and she finally caught it, and she's looking a little terrified, but she did it. We also have aerial predation from hawks and owls. The fencing can help for the ground predators. Livestock guardian dogs can help with all of that, but I don't have any. But pet dogs can help with it too. And then of course roosters. I do keep roosters with my hens, and I find that that's very useful. They do a lot of different calling and warning and stuff. Okay, so you all will of course have emergencies. It's a farm, but I mentioned that you should have a plan, and that would address emergencies. So emergencies I think about are power outages. Although these have become so common where I live that it really doesn't feel like an emergency anymore. But you need to be prepared for power outages, especially during the winter. We have large violent storms. What happens if your well goes dry and you have 100 animals on your farm? And then you should have a kill kit. If you have animals and one of them has a mortal injury and is suffering, you need to be able to end its suffering and its life in a manner that's safe for both the animal and the farmer. I think a lot of people default to firearms, but I have extremely rocky ground, and firing a firearm towards the ground is like not always the safest thing. So I tend to use bolt guns when I have to. So this is a small bolt gun appropriate for chickens and rabbits, and then I have a larger bolt gun for like the goats and sheep and pigs if I need it. Another thing to have on hand is extra fence parts, because trees will fall on your fence. And maybe just have someone else to call and help, like another local farmer, somebody just, I need another pair of hands. And you should also plan for what happens if the farmer gets sick, because really a farmer needs to be out there twice a day. So if somebody's sick, you need to have a plan. Okay, so getting towards end of life now. Transport. The only reason I transport my animals is to slaughter. But transport is usually stressful for animals, especially because, I mean, my animals just, I don't know, they live in the woods. Putting them in this metal box and taking them on a road it's a big deal for them. So it's going to be stressful no matter what, but I can acclimate them to the trailer. So when I have a group that's going to go into slaughter, I'll start feeding them on the transport trailer. And this is, again, kind of like a growing farm, like, sort of thing. So on the right was my palace trailer that I used at first, but now on the left I have a custom designed aluminum transport trailer. It's a cute little one. It's only 4 feet tall because I don't do any big animals. So yeah, at least if you can see there's a feed bowl on the trailer and it's muddy and the pigs are in and out of it. So at least the act of loading and being shut in on the trailer is not extremely alarming for them. Yeah, so I farm for meat, so all my stuff has to be USDA inspected, so it has to go to a slaughterhouse that'll do that. So that was one of my requirements for a slaughterhouse. But then you also need to think about storage. So I have, I think, 11 chest freezers at my house and farm, but that does not contain, I can't put all the meat that I need in there. So I also work with a cold storage place, and so I also have pallets of meat that are in long-term cold storage that I can drop off and pick up when I finally have room for it in my freezers. Yeah, I think I took almost the entire time, sorry, but we do have a couple minutes for questions if you have any. Yeah.
What type of soil testing and remediation did you have to do? You said something about laurel. Did you have to remove the laurel, and how did you do that?
Yeah, so I haven't actually removed laurel yet. So I have property on 2 sides of a river, and I'm only working on the side of the river that has hardly any laurel. So I recently applied for a grant that would help me work with a professional who's not me to try and remediate the other side to get the laurel out in a very permanent way so that I don't have issues when I start farming over there. So that's an expansion project for me.
Okay.
I may have missed in the beginning, but can you give me an idea of what kind of numbers you're working with in terms of animal quantities, and then how you look at the economics of it from a standpoint, because you know, in terms of just, you know, all the way right through the process to you know,
Yeah.
to make this profitable.
For sure. Yeah, that's a really good question. I've been increasing the number of pigs I grow every year. So last year I finished, I think, 56. But I started from about 10 pigs, I think, the first year. My goal is eventually to get to 100 pigs finishing a year. And the pigs are the species that I make the most money in, but they're also my focus. So I finished probably 10 or 12 sheep and goats each. So like 20, 25 a year. So that's a pretty small part of my business.
Restaurants, wholesale, retail, where are you, how are you trying to,
I pretty much do on-farm, direct-to-customer, and farmers markets. Every once in a while I try to convince a restaurant to take like 700 pounds of pig bones, because they're good for things like that, not so much home customers. But for the most part I just sell directly to people.
Why do you pasture versus barn? What's the benefit versus one or the other?
Yeah, so I think the benefit is really to the animal and the animal welfare. I think there's a benefit to me too, because I don't have to scoop poop, which I think would be unpleasant. But definitely them living out on pasture, I think, gives them the ability to live in social groups like they would if they were wild, and also to just run around and enjoy the sunshine. And they set up little, like the pigs have little landscaping projects that they do, and once in a while they decide to dig a massive hole and they work on it cooperatively, and so to just, I don't know, I think, yeah, animal welfare, I think it's.
What about the nutritional value of the beef? I mean, of the meat?
Yeah, I think.
More nutritional? Okay.
For sure, yeah, there's a group, FACT, they're the Food Animal Concerns Trust, and they have a lot of that data that shows that typically pasture-raised animals are much higher in omega-3s and lower in omega-6s and more vitamin D and all of that stuff. So they're a really good resource for yeah, it makes a difference not only to animal welfare while the animal is alive, but to meat quality and nutrition. Yep.
Do you have a schedule for how often you rotate, or do you just sort of play it by how the pasture looks?
Yeah, both. Yeah, for sure. No, we do a grazing plan every year. And so we set up in general, like we're gonna start here with this species and they're gonna go there. And so set up just a couple of months ahead of schedule, and then, you know, this species will follow and then this one. But so we have like a big long-term goal that we're moving towards, but each day you go out there and look at what it looks like, how much they've eaten, what's left, the weather that it's going to be for the next couple of days, and make a decision. Yep.
How do you determine if the land you already have is suitable for pasture? Because, I mean, I have land, I don't know what's on it, I have, some of it's cleared, some of it's woods. How do you make that determination?
Yeah, if you can, I would say get a professional out there. Like, get a forester and someone who's familiar with plants that are poisonous to livestock in your area, and have them walk you through it and say, yeah, this is what this is. Oh my gosh, you have laurel. And just take that information and then, yeah. Oh, I'm gonna do Sarah and then.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to thank you and suggest that if folks want to grab lunch, feel free. But if anybody wants to stay and talk, do you have a moment?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Is any of your land that you pasture raised wet? Any of the woods or anything?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of it is wet.
Okay, classified as wet. How is that? So you're in Connecticut.
Yeah.
How is that?
Yeah, so I have some areas that are considered wetlands. And so when I did my paddock fencing, I fenced the stuff that was wetlands separately. And so a lot of the year, I just don't put animals there.
But you can.
I can.
You're
Yeah,
allowed
during certain times of the year I do. Yeah, I just have to be responsible because it leads into a river.
Okay.
So if it's really wet, I don't want it.